Privyet. I was just thinking about the predicament that Donald Trump is faced with when it comes to the issue of his support or opposition to the 2002 war in Iraq. See, Donald Trump would like the American voter to believe that he was opposed to the invasion of Iraq from the get-go, but he doesn't really have concrete, irrefutable proof of that, does he? All he has is this spurious claim that at some point in time, when conveniently there were no cameras or microphones around to record it, he pulled Sean Hannity aside and privately expressed some reservations. Yeah, Sean, I don't really think we should be going into Iraq. But do we have proof of that? No, we don't. All we have is Donald Trump's word and Sean Hannity's word. We don't really have proof. And I was thinking, what if Donald Trump did have concrete, irrefutable proof that he was opposed to the invasion of Iraq? Would that perhaps increase the confidence of the U.S. voter in his leadership abilities? I think that it would. And then I started to ask myself, what if I had concrete, irrefutable proof that I was opposed to U.S. intervention in Syria before that ever occurred? Well, as it just so happens, I do, and you're looking at it right here. This is a form letter that I received from Cedric L. Richmond, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from the 2nd District in Louisiana. And I want to briefly explain the redactions that you see on here. I've redacted the address beneath my name for obvious reasons, and also because YouTube could ban this video if I dox myself. That's part of the terms of service. Also, these 4 redactions that you'll see on the right side of the paper, those were names and phone numbers that I scribbled on here because I was using this as a piece of scrap paper. I had no idea how valuable it would become to me someday. This is now one of my prized possessions, and I'm considering framing it and hanging it on my wall. Why? Because this form letter proves that in 2013, when Syria had not really entered the U.S. vocabulary yet, when the average U.S. citizen wasn't really thinking about Syria, one not-so-average U.S. citizen was, and that citizen is me. Now, I want to call your attention to the date on this letter. This is September 9th, 2013, and that's the date of my response. That's not the date of the letter that I wrote, and you don't get a response from these guys the very next day. It takes them a while to get back to you. And, these form letters, if you guys don't write to your representatives, and I know you don't, and you don't know what these are, it's basically a big middle finger in your face. It's a standard form that's the same for everybody, and it's probably not even written by the representative himself. It's probably written by some congressional aide, and then they just take a rubber stamp with the guy's signature and go and send it out to you. And the gist of the letter basically says that we're going to do what we're going to do anyway, and here's the reasons why, and we appreciate your concern, citizen, but this isn't really something you need to worry your pretty little head about. Just keep going to work, keep going to school, pay your taxes, and let the qualified people worry about foreign policy. It's not your business, right? But I did send a letter, and I want to make clear that I sent this letter before the military protest even occurred. Now, what military protest am I talking about? Perhaps some of you guys will recall when President Barack Obama drew his infamous red line in the sand on Syria in response to Bashar al-Assad's alleged use of chemical weapons against his own people. And then after that, a small handful, I really want to make this clear, a small handful of active duty U.S. military personnel protested. They began posting photos of themselves dressed in uniform on social media, holding up handwritten cardboard signs that said, "I won't go and fight in Syria. I don't want to go to war in Syria." Now, it shouldn't be surprising that the military were the only ones who really cared, because they have something at stake, right? These are the people who have to go over and fight. These are the people who have to risk their necks on the front line, so they have more to lose than the average citizen. And even despite that fact, it wasn't the entire military that spoke up. It was just a small handful. But that small handful that protested on the internet, not even in real life, was enough to delay U.S. intervention in Syria significantly. It was enough to embarrass the White House and to make President Obama look weak because he had to renege on his red line in the sand. Now I want to ask you guys a question. Let's do a quick thought experiment right here. If a small handful of active duty U.S. military personnel speaking up against the U.S. involvement in Syria was enough to delay it significantly, then what would real protest activity have done? What would have happened if it was not just a few people in the military, but the average citizen, we the people? What if all of you had done the exact same thing that I did and written letters to your representatives stating your opposition to U.S. involvement in Syria? Well, I'll tell you exactly what would have happened. There would have been no U.S. involvement in Syria, because to go ahead and do it anyway would have been political suicide for the Democrats. If we all spoke up, our voices would have been heard, but we didn't, because we didn't care. Well, let me amend. You didn't care. Does this sound like a preachy video? Well, it should, because preaching is exactly what I'm doing. Let me make this very clear. The point of me showing you this form letter is to illustrate the fact that I am more intelligent than you are. I knew exactly what would happen if the U.S. got involved in Syria. Now, what are you really saying here, Smooth Terrorist? Are you saying that you predicted the rise of ISIS? Yeah, I am. That's exactly what I'm saying. I didn't know that we would specifically have a group called ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Iraq and Syria, what do those have in common? Oh, yeah, they're both countries that we destabilized. I didn't know we'd specifically have a group with that name, but I did know that intervention would spawn terrorism, and I did know that that terrorism would come home to roost on U.S. soil and cost American lives. And I also knew that tensions with the Russian Federation would increase, and that's why I tried, in my own meager way, to put a stop to it before it happened. Now, were you thinking about Syria in 2013? Be honest. I think we probably both know that the answer is no. But let's ask this question. If every American had done the same thing I did, and if we had prevented U.S. intervention in Syria and prevented the rise of ISIS, what kind of world would we live in today? How different would things be? Well, to start off with, there would be a lot more human beings currently alive on Earth today. Now, obviously, the majority of the loss of human capital that occurred in response to U.S. intervention in Syria occurred in Syria. And I know that Americans don't really care a whole lot about the lives of foreigners. I don't blame you for that. The media doesn't want you to care. They never humanize these tragedies. They never put a face on it. You know, when the media talks about world events and war, they'll give you statistics. They'll say, 1,000 killed today in Syria, but they won't tell you their names. You won't get to see footage of grieving widows crying for their dead husbands. You won't get to see limbless children and orphans lying in hospitals. You won't see any of that. You'll just get the numbers, right? You'll just get the statistics. But even if you don't care about the loss of life in Syria, I have to assume that you do care at least a little bit about the loss of American lives. And if we had prevented U.S. intervention in Syria and hence prevented the rise of ISIS, then the Orlando nightclub shooting perpetrated by Omar Mateen would not have occurred. Omar Mateen has made it very clear, he stated in no uncertain terms, that the reason he did what he did, his motivation, was U.S. intervention in Syria. We are killing people in his country, so he killed people in ours. And it's that simple. 49 Americans dead and 53 wounded. 49 Americans dead. That's 49 spouses grieving for their loved one. That's 49 sets of parents mourning the loss of their child. And now I'm going to read all 49 names. Stanley Almodovar III, 23 years old. Amanda Alviar, 25 years old. Oscar A. Aracena Montero, 26 years old. Rodolfo Ayala, 33 years old. Antonio Davon Brown, 29 years old. Daryl Roman Burt II, 29 years old. Angel L. Candelario Pedro, 28 years old. Juan Chavez Martinez, 25 years old. Louis Danielle Conde, 39 years old. Corey James Cannell, 21 years old. Tevin Eugene Crosby, 25 years old. Dianca Deidre Drayton, 32 years old. Simone Adrian Carrillo Fernandez, 31 years old. Leroy Valentinin Fernandez, 25 years old. Mercedes Marisol Flores, 26 years old. Peter O. Gonzalez Cruz, 22 years old. Juan Ramon Guerrero, 22 years old. Paul Terrell Henry, 41 years old. Frank Hernandez, 27 years old. Miguel Angel Honorado, 30 years old. Javier Jorge Reyes, 40 years old. Jason Benjamin Josephat, 19 years old. Eddie Jamal Droy Justice, 30 years old. Anthony Louis Lorena Denizla, 25 years old. Christopher Andrew Leonin, 32 years old. Alejandro Barrios Martinez, 21 years old. Brenda Lee Marquez McCool, 49 years old. Gilberto Ramon Silva Menendez, 25 years old. Kimberly Morris, 37 years old. Akira Monet Murray, 18 years old. Luis Omar Acacio Capo, 20 years old. Geraldo A. Ortiz Jimenez, 25 years old. Eric Ivan Ortez Rivera, 36 years old. Joel Rayon Panigua, 32 years old. Jean Carlos Mendez Perez, 35 years old. Enrique L. Rios Jr., 25 years old. Jean C. Neves Rodriguez, 27 years old. Javier Emmanuel Serrano Rosado, 35 years old. Christopher Joseph Sanfeliz, 24 years old. Yelmari Rodriguez Solivan, 24 years old. Edward Sotomayor Jr., 34 years old. Shane Yvonne Tomlinson, 33 years old. Martin Benitez Torres, 33 years old. Jonathan Antonio Camwe Vega, 24 years old. Jean P. Rivera Velasquez, 37 years old. Luis S. Vielma, 22 years old. Frankie Jimmy De Jesus Velasquez, 50 years old. Louis Daniel Wilson Leon, 37 years old. And finally, Gerald Arthur Wright, 31 years old. 49 Americans dead. 49 lives lost. And the reason why is because you were not as intelligent as this Chris Anderson character, this guy who calls himself the Smooth Terrorist. This guy who is telling you now to vote for Donald Trump if you want to avert war with the Russian Federation. This has been the Smooth Terrorist, and if you enjoyed this video, then download it, re-upload it, mirror it, parody it, make it your own, because Google can't censor me unless you let them. До свидания.